Welcome, everyone, to Talking Back to Suicide. My name is Dr. Diane Kaufman. Although I like to be called Diana for my creative self, I'm a poet, artist, humanism in medicine awardee, a retired child psychiatrist, and the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And there's Kino Isaac coming to us from South Africa. He's the co-host. Kino is a DJ, music producer, entrepreneur, and an advocate for the mental health well-being of independent artists. And we're delighted to have our special guest today with us. Jenny Lee Hodgkins is a pianist, composer, vocalist, performer, a music educator, poet, author, and a creative empowerment coach. She is a graduate of the University of South Florida. As the founder and CEO of Your Creative Chord, Jenny has taken her creative skills and experiences combined with her spiritual practices. She's a 39-year plus practicing Buddhist to inspire and sustain us in our unique creative energies. Jenny helps us to reconnect with our creativity, transform obstacles into growth, and live with greater clarity, purpose, and inner harmony. Jenny is also a hobbyist nature photographer and says, quote, "Nature's beauty and my personal experiences shape my coaching approach, empowering your creative flow and inspired living. Just as nature rejuvenates me, I believe it can inspire and help you find balance and clarity on your path to growth." She also declares, "I believe the arts hold the power to transform pain into purpose. Creativity isn't just something we do, it's how we breathe through challenges, how we heal, and how we connect." So we're going to be connecting with you, Jenny, and we're so glad that you're with us today.
Thank you both so much for having me. And I do want to start by saying how much I appreciate and respect the work you're both doing for artists and for all people in terms of nurturing their mental wellness and having that real talk about the mental health issues that we all experience. So it's a mutual admiration club here.
Jenny, could you share with us from your own life, what has your journey with creativity been, and how has it been inspired?
Oh, wow. Do you guys have about 5 days to talk this over? um, in a nutshell, I grew up in a family with family dynamics that were pretty complex, with some narcissistic type behaviors in my family, and the chaos that kind of created. And from a very early age, I kind of learned to kind of keep my vulnerability to myself a little bit. And so I was very fortunate that my parents got me started in piano lessons at a very young age of 7. And immediately I was very mesmerized by the patterns and harmony that I found within music. Like, just right away, it just drew me in and kind of calmed me. I think maybe my nervous system needed that, calmness. And as I, got into maybe being 11 or 12 years of age, I started writing my own lyrics and songs and composing songs on the piano. And for me, creativity was a safe place to be myself, to express myself, particularly in piano music, because no one knew exactly what I was saying, because it's interpretive. And it was a release and a comfort. So from a very young age, creativity was kind of an amazingly protective karma, that I encountered when I was a kid. And then, unfortunately, through most of my younger days, I expressed, I should say, unfortunately, it's not, there are two sides to that. But what I was going to say is that creativity helped me express my suffering, my unhappiness, basically. And I think in a way, got me through a lot of those struggles in my youth. And then when I was 23, I went on probably because of the suffering in my upbringing, I sought out spiritualism. I looked like crazy for philosophy or some kind of practice that helped. I was raised in a Christian household, but no matter how much I prayed, it didn't relieve the suffering and the disharmony that I was experiencing. So I eventually, at age 23, encountered Buddhism. And I will say the impact that my Buddhist practice has had and still has on my creative life is where it really kind of turned for me, because it helped me, just naturally, my creativity started changing from angst to more optimism, more hope, and more finding more hope, finding more ways to feel joyful in my life. So, and then it's become kind of a lifelong practice of using those two practices, a spiritual practice and philosophy, and my creative practices to nurture my life, basically, and help me get through stuff and build resilience and that sort of thing. I hope that explains.
Yes.
And that answers.
You mentioned suffering. If you feel comfortable, in what ways were you suffering? In external, internal triggers? How were you expressing or feeling or thinking that suffering?
Well, as I said, I was basically bullied a lot, by a particular sibling, and to this day, that behavior still kind of exists. And right now, I'm the sole caregiver for my 86-year-old mother in a family with these kind of toxic behaviors. And I've learned over time, thankfully, to set healthy boundaries. But the suffering was, emotional, mental, sometimes physical, bullying kind of thing. And so through all of that, I developed a hypervigilance, and didn't know yet how to set healthy boundaries, didn't know yet how to not make myself small. And so my life has been a journey through learning how to transform those dynamics, starting with myself, starting with awareness, great awareness of my overextending, people-pleasing, enabling middle child tendencies, and reeling myself in to protect myself. And I'm still working through a lot of that. It doesn't go away. It's just a matter of what's the word? Maturity and growth and expansion as I continue to navigate it. If that, I don't know if that's answering your question there.
Yeah. So would that, in quotation marks, people pleasing, would that be an example of a not healthy boundary or a lack of a boundary, or how would you
Thank you.
describe
Yeah. And that's a big part of why I do what I do in my coaching work and in my podcast and all of my digital products. I start with resetting energy, and that starts with boundary setting, and because I'm practicing it myself, living through it myself. So it's a matter of recognizing that I have had tendencies in my life to bend over backwards to help other people feel harmonious without getting anything reciprocally from that, or bending over backwards to keep conflict from happening, and recognizing that I was contributing to a negative habit, basically. And so the awakening of that for myself has been a journey. It impacted not just my family dynamics, but it impacted my teaching career as an educator. It impacted me as a leader. And I recognize, fortunately, through my Buddhist practice, that there are positive things and negative things in everything. And so the negative side of that is, it caused me a lot of suffering. I overextended to the detriment of my own wellness, and I don't do that anymore. I've awakened to that. But the positive part of that is that because of that training in my family dynamics, I learned how to be calm, how to have confident leadership. This was alongside of learning the Buddhist practice as well, and it helped me be an amazingly confident and calm as a teacher, as a performer, as a leader, because I was able to navigate, hypervigilance, allowed me to see all the different things quickly and navigate through that. So that's the positive side of that. But then it got to the point where I felt as a caregiver and as an HOA leader in my community, I ended up in burnout, and that's when my awakening really starkly helped me understand. Okay, this is a lifelong pattern of overextension, of hypervigilance. You've burned yourself out. You have to learn how to draw boundaries. So that's the process that I'm in. That's the process that I practice: inner boundaries, external boundaries, interpersonal boundaries, workflow boundaries. Learning that boundaries are something that feed my wellness. That's the journey that I'm on. I hope that clarified that a little bit.
Yes, very much. And thank you. You talked about an awakening or developing that awareness. What was that it was a process, or was there reaching a bottom and then an epiphany, or a combination thereof?
Yeah, I think a combination. I think that's how life works, sometimes. But what really awakened me is that I realized I was in deep burnout. By the time I realized that, I had just resigned from being the board president after a very grueling experience with that. And at the same time, I had just published 2 books, and I had just rebooted my podcast. Just as I was launching, my coaching program and all my products and my podcast, I had hit that burnout, window.
How did you know? What were your symptoms of burnout?
Yeah. Well, they were accumulative. I will say that. And looking back now, I can see the accumulation of it. But things that I'm aware of now are exhaustion, physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, and negative feelings. Sometimes resentment towards others, or resentment towards my position, or disappointment, or feeling unappreciated, all of these things. And I now know that when I felt these negative emotions, it's kind of a wake-up call, okay, to take a look at, am I in my lane? Am I staying in my lane? Because now I'm aware of it. So I don't, I'm very adamant with myself that I don't do anything I don't want to do, physically, spiritually, and mentally. If I don't want to do it, I am not going to do it, because it's not bringing my best to the other person, and it's not being true to who I am or aligned. And I learned that through that burnout experience, and I'm in that recovery now. So I feel much better, but the awareness came gradually, and it's still a practice, that I still have to do.
You've spoken of your Buddhist practice. What is a Buddhist practice? How does one practice Buddhism?
What is a Buddhist practice? Well, first of all, I listened to a couple of your shows, and there was a guest that you recently had. I think her name was Megan something, but she had practiced a certain kind of Buddhism, and she did a book called the Mudflower book. Or
yes.
Yeah, and
Megan Polly.
she's practicing a different form than I did, but I really resonated with that, because what she was talking about is, which is a core piece of the philosophy of the SGI Buddhism that I practice. And it's the concept of the lotus flower blooms beautifully because it comes out of the muck. It can't grow without that muck. And also, according to, the practice that I practice, the philosophy is that cause and effect are simultaneous in the Buddhism that I practice, meaning we understand, when you make a cause, you get an effect. And in Buddhism, when we make causes, whether good or bad, it creates karma, right? Patterns in our lives. So the idea is that I want to make the best possible cause, make a noble cause, for the, fundamentally to, how do I say, I'm trying to say, support the sanctity of life, not only in nature, but in everybody, outside of me, as well as in my own life. So when I'm making the most positive cause like that, I'm also simultaneously triggering an effect. So I'm building good fortune and wisdom and compassion, raising my life state through that. So that's that symbolism of the lotus flower. But to answer your question, what is a Buddhist practice? For me, it's 3-pronged. It's practice, which is the act of actually chanting. We have an actual mantra, so it's a vocal meditation, a breath work, and we actually say Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and we just repeat that phrase, and it's kind of a rhythmic meditation type thing. So physiologically, there's some benefit to that. And then the other aspect of it is study. We're encouraged to ask questions, to really study the Buddhist philosophy. So we regularly have publications and discussions with each other weekly and monthly in local meeting places where we try to understand, the philosophy of Buddhism. And then the third prong is faith, and developing faith is that belief in, nurturing the belief in your own potential, unlimited potential, and that of others, unlimited potential. And especially now in today's society where it's a very challenging society that we live in, and especially when you're dealing with mental health issues, or feeling angst from whatever problems that we individually encounter, the Buddhist philosophy and practice for me is, and always has been, incredibly transformative, because it helps me create value from anything, from my suffering, and it helps me nurture my own hope, which is kind of the premise of the practice, that we have that power. We're not powerless. We have it within us. So it's a practice of nurturing that and polishing that through faith, practice, and study. I hope that it's a huge topic to try to understand, but that's the gist of it.
I'd like to share with you your own words from one of your poems.
Oh,
right?
thank you.
Yeah, from your collection, Kaleidoscope of the Heart, a collection of poetry and lyrics, which is most graciously a free download on your website, right? And from your poem, Free Falling, and your first line caught my attention because we're the Hold On campaign. And also, I've done a workshop on letting go and holding on for hope, healing, and resilience.
Very synergistic, yeah.
So the beginning of your poem, Free Falling, is free falling, letting go, holding on, only to hope, trusting with my faith, coming from a choice I make, face to face with myself, depending on nothing else, looking straight at the truth, determining to show proof. Shine, grow, polish, rise, fighting to become wise. Give, share, open, love, believing I have enough. Touch, feel, care, show, syncing with a rhythmic flow. Promise, vow, act, pray, create value for each day, roaring in the lion's way. And your last stanza is free falling from inside, learning to enjoy the ride, releasing old delusions there, breathing in pure, fresh air, closing off from all doubt, floating like a happy cloud, soaking in endless space, blue skies of deepening faith.
Thank you so much.
So you mentioned so much in this, but to begin with, when you said releasing all delusions there, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah.
There was a poem lyric song that I co-collaborated with on, and it's about suicide is a liar. Right? That it's
Very good.
telling you somehow that suicide is your friend, right? But it's
so much.
lying. So you potentially you could say it's a delusional thought.
Yes.
But when you say releasing all delusions, so what are the delusions you're mentioning?
Well, first of all, thank you. That was fun to hear somebody else read my poem. I owe you one for that. That whole poem to me is a description of fighting against the negative fundamental darkness in your life, in everyone's life, which to me is what delusion is. It's a disbelief in your own unlimited potential, and what we call the Buddha nature, which is an unlimited potential to rise above and create value from anything and feel hope and compassion, just pulling out all of those positive um, aspects of our lives that we all have. So delusion, fighting against that, to me is a lifelong practice, because we all have innate darkness from moment to moment, and so that's where my Buddhist spiritual practice really continues to help me to create resilience, because I understand it literally is a fight against an inner kind of determination for us to recognize and nurture the belief in our own greater self, in our own wonderful, capabilities and capacity, and using that belief to nurture hope, to nurture positivity, to nurture confidence, and through practice, of course, making those come to life. And by doing so, through my own life anyway, I see the delusions and the negativity are kind of overpowered. They become dormant when you polish your life, when you strengthen your inner life in that way. That's what I tried to convey in that poem, and that's, to me, what it's a constant, I think, for everybody.
If one were not a practicing Buddhist, right, and they wanted to strengthen their resilience, and I'd also like you to define resilience, what would you recommend, in terms of your experiences, lived experience, and your coaching experiences? Because I'm thinking that with a suicidal state of mind, which is coming together of many factors, that a person can be feeling unbearable pain, of which they do not see any resolution.
Right.
And being dead seems to be the only solution, which is not a solution. How can we help someone, not only in that moment of crisis, but those skills need to be practiced way before.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's where, and I'll put this in quotation marks, I think that's where there's a failure going on, or not personally, and families and schools, communities, somehow being able to share the struggles we're going through, to not be ashamed about that, right? To talk about the lessons we're learning in life, and somehow to build and strengthen our resilience so that it becomes part of our nature that we can call upon when that darkness, we're trapped in the darkness and we don't see a way out.
Yes, boy, you covered a lot of territory with that. Well, first I want to say I'm not a mental health practitioner.
Yes.
I'm a creator, I'm an educator, and I'm a coach. So I have no credentials in the world of mental health. And I turn that over to you and those like you who have that training. I will say, I also don't have any experience with suicide ideation personally. I did have to deal with a sibling 3 times, trying, and didn't succeed. I guess, first of all, to define resilience, I think it is kind of what you just said. It's a practice of strengthening the positive tools that we have at our disposal, whether that's connection with other people, sitting with our feelings, expressing our feelings, that's where creativity and spiritual practices really come in for me. I think it's a practice of the things that we have available to us to fight against the darkness in our lives. And I think you hit a nail on the head that I first of all, again, hats off to both of you for what you do to bring the topic of mental health to the forefront. Because I think what really helps people, whether they're struggling with suicide or just simply depressed or going through a hard time or struggling to develop their own resilience or confidence, it's, being able to sit with your feelings in a safe place with safe people being able to hear dialogues like this or with your other guests on your show, going to therapy, being in a group, of therapy, getting treatment in some way. And for me, the tools that I use that work not just for me, but for thousands of students I've taught, over the years is creative tools, whether that's listening to poetry, just listening to the poem that you just read from my book. I think whether you write poetry or music or or art or dance, you don't have to actually be a creator to experience the incredible empowerment of an impact of creative expression. So listening to poems or music that express the feelings that you have and help you express it in that way. I can tell you that from many years of gigging as a vocalist pianist over the years, many people would come to me and say that they appreciated it so much, whatever song or performance I gave, because it helped them express something they did not know how to say or that was in them and they couldn't find a way to release it. And I hear many people talk about listening to works that bring out or evoke their sadness or their depression or their angst in some way. That's not a negative thing. It allows you to sit with your feelings and get them out. And even better if you can, use some of the creative tools that, that I teach in my content, in my podcast and in my coaching program, in that journaling, creating art, doodling, improvisation, learning a musical instrument, singing, all of these things they release something in us and they help the creativity and the act of expressing, the act of connecting with a performance or expressing it yourself. It definitely releases some of this angst. And I think that's one very powerful tool that can be used when people are struggling with these kinds of things. I hope in a roundabout way I got back to your question.
Pino, you are a musician, right? Performer. Join the conversation.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we hear
I'm just
you.
having like bad connectivity. So just let me know if there's anything that you do miss. So, Jenny, I can like vouch for Buddhism and I support you 200%. And I agree with all that you have mentioned about Buddhism and spirituality. And I'm saying this with confidence because I've been through it myself. So before 2019, or my entire life, I've suffered with anxiety, I've suffered with depression. I carried a lot of negative baggage due to external circumstances, with me. And then 2019 came along and I decided to go to Thailand. And that's where I found Buddhism and the culture and how people went about life. And then I compared it to Western culture, which, look, many of us in South Africa are living. We're more westernized here than anything else compared to the East. And when I came back to South Africa and I started focusing on mindfulness, meditation, spending time in nature, finding spirituality, because for listeners, there is a huge difference between religion, doctrine, and spirituality. There's a huge difference there.
Right.
And I'm not saying that I am not completely anti-religion. I was brought up a Catholic, and I'm still involved in it, not as much as I used to be, and that's because of my parents who are still involved in it fully, and that's just out of respect for them. And I also don't forget what I wouldn't say the church as a whole, but members of the church have done for me my entire life. And I still strongly believe in Jesus, but not in a way where a staunch Catholic would. Because for me, I feel Jesus was a spiritual being rather than a religious being. Because in his time, in his era, there wasn't this fancy building. He was more spiritual. And that is why I still have that connection with him. But anyway, to the point I'm getting to here is, practicing or Buddhist practices in spirituality does really take a person a long way. And I highly advise that to a lot of the listeners out there. So I'm going to ask you a controversial question, right?
Mm,
And also, once again, my life before 2019, whenever it came to the topic of anxiety or
mm,
depression, was
mm,
going to see my GP, who will say, hey, okay, you're going through ABC, stress at work, school, wherever, here's some medication that's going to sort the issue out. And, life is great after that. And you're like, okay, cool, you take the medication,
mm,
and
mm,
after a couple of months, a year later, it happens again. You go back to the GP. Hey,
mm.
here's some medication again. And then when I found spirituality, I started to detach from medication and going to see the
Wow.
doctor whenever,
Wow.
anxiety was involved. And I'm not saying that I
Mm.
don't still have those moments in life. I
Right.
do,
Right.
but then I look to the higher power to actually get through it before I turn to
Right.
medication.
Mm.
So, what's your take on it? Medication versus spirituality?
First of all, thank you for sharing such a personal struggle and background. And I'm sure many people can resonate with the spiritual quest as well as the dealing with medication when it comes to anxiety. Um, Again, I'm not a mental health professional, so I can't speak to the medication. And I will say from my own personal belief, if you need medication, take your medication. I mean, if that's going to help your mental, being, listen to your doctor. But also, I also believe strongly that we have our own wisdom. Sometimes, we have to be our own stronger advocate. And like you found other tools such as a spiritual practice that helped alleviate and helped you decrease your reliance on medication. That's amazing, to be able to do that. Not everyone can do that necessarily. I don't know, the physiology of it, but for me, um, my understanding is these are all research science backed tools that I use this in my coaching program. I use it in my personal life, meaning spiritual practices, meditation, um, being around positive people, practicing a creative practice of whatever it is, whether it's journaling or playing piano or joining a choir, whatever it is. These are all putting yourself in a vicinity of these kinds of positive practices. They do make an amazing impact on our mental well-being. It's just a fact of research, data, science proves it. But for me, it's experiential. The fact that I have always played the piano or written lyrics or poetry or sung or performed has helped me navigate those anxiety ridden times in my life or navigate difficulties. And it also helps me express my joy and my hopes and my dreams. And it's, creativity as a tool, any spiritual practice, whether it's prayer, meditation, yoga, chanting, nature immersion is a big one for me. These all work to alleviate anxiety and to boost your creative expression, your energy. So I stand by all of that. That's what I do. That's what I do as a coach. That's what I do as a creator. So, and I can relate to you a lot too, because, I also have had a lot of anxiety because of my family dynamics, because of the lifestyle I led. And I went to Japan for 5 years. You went to Thailand, but I traveled to Japan and lived there for 5 years because I wanted to see the roots of the Buddhist practice that I practice, and also because I wanted to do another scientifically proven thing that helps your creativity, and that is to get out of your comfort zone. And so, going to live in a foreign country to learn how other people see things, to see things from a completely different culture. It was difficult, and it drew out some of my anxiety as I was there, but it also has made an incredible impact on my world perspective and helped me see things in a different way. So these are collectively spiritual practices, things like getting out of your comfort zone. And I'm not suggesting everybody has to move to a foreign country, but just trying things that maybe going home a different way, taking a different route. Or if you're a composer, or instead of composing with a pen and paper, or instead of composing with a software program that you normally use, start with a different instrument or start with a different key, whatever. Just do something completely different from what you normally do. And these things will, and I've experienced it myself, and many people that I've taught have experienced it. It boosts your creative energy, which boosts your expression, which boosts your mood. So that actually does decrease, anxiety, from at least from my experience and from what I've seen. I hope that answered that.
Yeah. No, thank you for your opinion on that. I mean, getting out of our comfort zones
Mm,
is a necessity. I work on a triangle with my clients. Environment influences your thoughts
yeah,
influences your
that's right.
behavior. And that's
Yes.
exactly what happened to me, throughout my
Mm,
life. And we tend to
mm,
find ourselves in an environment that we choose to remain stuck in because, hey, I've been here my whole life. My
yeah.
friends are around the corner. My family stays close by. Not realizing that all these people around you is holding you back from living,
Mm,
your best life.
mm,
So, and don't be afraid to get out of that place, that area, whether you own the house, whether you're renting apartment, get out
right.
because it can only bring you more positivity in your life. On the topic
Right.
of being a creator, let's talk about being a musician and why I actually, I don't think I chose it. It was a calling. Hey, artists need you because psychologically they are battling and you've been through it. You still go through it.
Mm,
And
mm,
this is the issue that's still present in this day and age. When I work with independent artists, and the thing is, they want to create, as you said, play the piano, play the guitar, produce their
mm,
track that's been, lingering in their mind for so long. They want to get all that done. Number
mm,
one, there's costs involved that they have to now take into consideration to actually get that project complete. And some of
mm.
these projects that we do are like extremely expensive, but we make our a plan, a way around it, we get it done. The thing is, I'm also dealing with artists who have responsibilities, family responsibilities. They got a wife, they got children. They need
Right.
to support these children and their family. They need to put food on the table. They need to
Mm,
keep the lights on. So why they end up in depression, why they end up in anxiety, why they end up, thinking, okay, you know what, best I take my life is because I need to support my family. And in order for me to do that, I have to step away from being a creative. And that's what I'm trying to solve. You know,
mm.
how do we get that right? How do I get them in the right state of mind to say, hey, okay, look, why don't we balance this out? I understand you got a family to support, you have EB expenses, on the music side of stuff. Maybe let's see what we can do with your time management. That becomes difficult, but also still causes a lot of anxiety for them. So, what advice would you give them?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is. Are you saying how to relieve the anxiety around it, or are you saying how do you help
How do
independent?
we how do we prevent artists from taking their life, or you know because they don't know how to deal with the anxiety that comes with that pressure of, look, I have a family to support,
Mm,
but I also
mm,
want to be a creative as well. And
mm,
what I have seen happen many times over is that they just leave what they're passionate about, composing music, writing a book, because life is hitting me now.
mm,
And as they progress, the depression gets more severe, the
mm,
anxiety gets more severe, they live an unhappy life, divorce rate is on a rise because of that.
mm.
So that's where like
I see.
I'm stuck at the moment. And that's what I'm attempting
Mm,
to, resolve for them.
mm. Well, first of all, thank you for being there for them, because just having a sounding board when you're stressed out and dealing with the life of an artist or struggling artist is a huge fortune for them to have. So, kudos to what you're doing as a support to that. Obviously, I have no blanket solution for every artist out there. I will say from my own experience, each person has to decide for themselves, the way through, the way to do things. Um, for me, it's never been acceptable to set down my creativity. I may have had to step up in other ways to make money, temporarily for things, but to me, that's not a failure. That's part of life training. That's part of, going through life's difficulties and being resilient, being resourceful to find ways through that. But I think helping people understand that creativity is part of your life. It's not something that's an external pursuit that once you get it and make money with it to a certain amount or degree or fame or whatever, that's not going to do anything to help you internally. You may think so. I've had that experience myself, thinking, okay, when I get this many gigs and I'm making this much money a year, I'm going to feel, successful or whatever. And I did those things. And I remember vividly being in the middle of that and thinking, is this all there is? So it's helping people understand that it's not an external pursuit. Creativity is your life. And it's always in your life. There's also been periods of my life where my teaching schedule kind of took over like a bulldozer in my schedule. So I had limited time to write music or poems. But I know from those experiences that the music's always in your life, or whatever it is, the creativity is always in your life. So I would suggest, from my own personal experience, don't be afraid of your hardships. Don't be afraid of this detour that you're on, and look for what you really want to do and find resourceful ways to get there. But note that sometimes we have temporary detours, but those detours are just like in creativity. When you're expressing something and you're really in touch with your voice, sometimes it takes you in a completely different direction you didn't expect to go. Life is just like that. So I would say, just really keep using your creativity as a tool and keep forging the faith in yourself as an artist, because fundamentally, especially in today's society, artists have an incredible mission to bring hope to other people. So that doesn't mean we get an easy life. We have to go through crap. We have to go through our own struggles with things, right? So use what's in your life, use where you are right now, and pull out from that something, creatively from that. I know my late mentor in life, Dr. Daisaku Ikeda, he was the head of the SGI Buddhist lay organization. He said something like, opening the doorway to your own creative life is harder than pushing open the door to the universe. And I think creators get that. Like when it's not just about creating music or art, it's about creating in the midst of life's difficulties. To me, that's where my best creativity comes from, because it's turning, suffering into value. And I would just say, use what's in your life now and trust it. Build that trust in yourself, build that self-belief in yourself, and know that it's not forever. You're not always going to be in this specific, economic dynamic or financial struggle or, creative role forever. That always changes, and it's up to you to change it. So one of the things that I teach as part of my, coaching philosophy and all my products is develop self-belief. And I think that hits the core of the question that you have, that artists really struggle with that because we're so hypersensitive. We're so attuned to everything. So I think, forging these kinds of practices with deepening your belief in your own potential, deepening your belief that you're going to survive it, deepening your belief that you have the ability to find a way through this creatively, even if it's not a creative job, there are things you can do. And of course, like we've already talked about, spiritual practices, creative practices, and practical strategies, helping you with boundary setting. That may be a big part of it, at least for my journey. Energy management is a huge piece of what I help people with. And it sounds like that's something that you are doing as well. Sometimes people feel just completely fried on things, and they don't recognize they're leaking energy in ways that are not aligned with who they are and who they want to be. So I think starting there is a good place too. Sorry, I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Yeah. No, that was a perfect answer, and I agree with you. So there's one more question, So that's the starting point. What we're dealing with when it comes to mental health. Then we get artists, and we have seen this happen over and over again, no matter which level in the industry you're at. You reach the top, You haven't resolved all the negative baggage from the past. Self-sabotage happens,
Right.
substance abuse, drugs,
Mm,
alcohol,
mm,
suicide now plays a role
mm,
again. So
mm,
I've started with, the basics. Like it's like this, when an artist approaches me and say, Kino, okay, I want to get going. I want to get into the studio. I'm like, no, that's not happening now. That maybe is going to happen in the next month because
yeah.
I first need to get to know you. And I've built
Mm,
this question of self awareness. And you need
mm,
to be open with me, because you may be carrying baggage with you right now that, yes, I want you to bring out in your
mm,
music, bring
mm.
it out in your art because you're going
That's
to resonate with millions of people
good.
around the world.
Yes,
But
exactly.
in the same breath, I need you to get healed as well from
Mm,
whatever may have happened, even when you were 8 years old, that you're still carrying with you
mm,
now. Because
mm,
I don't want you to one day, which you do have the potential to do,
right.
perform on the biggest stages in the world. And next thing you know, I get this notification that you have, died by suicide
Mm,
because of that baggage,
mm,
you know.
mm.
So what's your take on that? You know, do you agree? Would you agree that I'm going down the right path with this
Oh, I think
solution?
you were doing a beautiful job, and it's basically you're working with getting to know who they really are and what really is what they want to express, and you're supporting them in a way that they probably aren't used to, which is why they probably give you some um, feedback on that. I think it's wonderful work that you're doing there. I would also say that I don't believe we can heal ourselves before we go into the studio. I think it's a lifelong process of transforming what's inside us into value. And even that angst of dealing with the and I go through it myself, believe it or not, in a very mundane scenario. I'm a sole caregiver in an estranged family for an 86-year-old parent, so I'm still grieving the illusion of a family I thought that I was coming up here to kind of deepen a connection with. That doesn't diminish the belief that I have in my family members, that they have potential, for that to change. I send them prayer, daily for their happiness. But all of the feelings that I go through as carrying that burden as a caregiver by myself, that's not what I came up here for. Or it's not what I intended, but I fully accept it. And I think what I'm trying to say is, even in my era of this time of my career, my challenges don't stop, and so even though my challenges don't stop, to me, that is the benefit of being a creator, because you have an endless source of expression. You can turn that suffering into a way to relate to other people who are feeling the same thing, but they don't know how to express it. Or in case of your clients, they might be talking through those things with you, and that sparks an idea for them to emote it in their musical project. So I just don't think anything is wasted in terms of creativity. And I don't think it ever ends. And as long as we understand that and we impress upon people, this is life, and it's everybody's life. It's not, you're not by yourself with this. We all feel, anguish of this or that. But the power of the artist and the person who supports the artist is to help people use the material in their lives to connect with themselves and find a bigger purpose in it. Helps, because when you realize that you're helping other people express it, that's how I feel with my work as a coach. I feel like I'm using everything in my life to help other people get through something I've already been through, or we go through it together side by side. And I think that connection that you're building in that way is, 90% of the battle of helping people get through things. That's just how I see that. And I think you're doing excellent work, Kino, because artists are so, we're hypersensitive people, as you know, and we have, I think a what's the word, an intensely bigger buildup of anxiety than most people do, because we feel things on such a deep level. But that's also, on the flip side, an incredible power, an incredible resource. And if you can help your artists hone that, then yay, our world's going to be a better place. And it continues to, I feel like we'll continue to benefit from that. So don't give up on that. I think you're doing a wonderful job. Yeah.
Very
Keep doing
deep
it.
level. It's like deep. You feel things deep, you know. But just one more comment, before Diana takes over. Like, you use the key word there, purpose. Like, as an artist, you need to realize that, look, yes, you have these gifts, you're talented, you go into the studio, you make this awesome track, but there needs to be a bigger purpose to your
Yes.
overall brand, because as a
I agree.
creator, you have a responsibility, as you said, to make a difference in the world.
Yes. I
What
agree.
am I going to do?
But I would say,
And
Kino, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's not just important for us to have a sense of that we have a bigger purpose with our mission, not just because it helps us direct our creativity, but also it helps us overcome our ego, our fundamental darkness.
yeah,
If we're just caught up in our own talent and aren't I great, that only goes so far, and then you feel empty. But like you said, if you're focused on how can I use my skills, my unique talents to help other people or to bring a message, which is what you guys are doing basically through your podcast and through your work with artists, that is not just better for the other people, it helps you grow through difficulties because you can keep focused on that. Do you agree with that?
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Thank you. This was great. Thanks. Yeah.
I told you it's the Mutual Admiration Club.
Jenny, if you feel comfortable sharing about this, I think earlier on, I think you might have mentioned that a family member had attempted suicide. Is that so? What was that talked about in the family? There can be, as we know, silence, shame, and stigma around mental health issues. And I think people can still feel very uncomfortable about if I perhaps see someone struggling, and that's not always the case. Sometimes the person isn't revealing on the outside what's going on the inside.
Right.
But if there's been a suicide attempt in the family, how do family members handle this? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, like I said, I come from a family, with very complex dynamics, and this particular sibling is still estranged from me, so I have to be very careful how I speak. But yeah, that person has always exhibited, and we didn't really realize this until hindsight is 20/20. As you get older, you start to recognize things. She has exhibited a lot of narcissistic, toxic behaviors, and there was just a lot of drama around all of that, and a very unhappy human being. And 3 times we actually had to take her to the hospital because she OD'd in an attempt. And so the whole family revolved around how do we help her? How do we resolve that? But in those days where I lived in Kentucky, there wasn't a lot of therapeutic resources that were available, to be frank, and most of them weren't really aware of those kinds of situations. I mean, it's grown tremendously now. It's much more cosmopolitan, thankfully, because the University of Kentucky has really grown it. But I will say that, yeah, my family members did have no idea. They had no idea how to deal with that. And even in hindsight, we're still kind of reeling from all of that. And I don't have an actual diagnosis. Like I said, that those family members are estranged from me by their choice, not mine. And I'm just praying for their happiness daily. But I also, I know for my mother's protection and for my own protection, I just keep healthy boundaries in place because of the anger and the toxic type behaviors that came out. It's very regrettable. I wish I had a better answer for that question.
Right. And reflecting back on your poem that I had read earlier, use the word letting go and also holding on. Could you say more about that? What do we a generic we, right? Although there's this specific I, need
Yeah.
to let go of, and what do we hold on to?
I just love your questions. You're such an artist. Um,
Oh, thank you.
you're just piercing right to the point. I mean, I wrote that poem a long time ago. It's part of my Kaleidoscope of the Heart poetry and lyrics collection book I published a couple of years ago. But in general, I think many of my poems, including that one, express that idea to. Oh, I think we lost Kino.
Still
Did we?
connection
That's the way
problems
that
in
goes.
South
Okay.
Africa.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Many of my poems express similar ideas, and that is that wrestling with anxiety or self-doubt. So the letting go is about let go of those negative thoughts, let go of the anxiety, let go of disbelief in your own empowerment. And the hanging on or holding on is holding on to learning, to holding on to trusting yourself, holding on to trusting in your potential to overcome, holding on to the fact that you're not powerless. That has been a kind of through thread of my creativity since I became a Buddhist practitioner, because the Buddhist practice itself lifts my life state and has kind of helped transform the direction of a lot of the things that I've written, including that poem. It came right out of that thought, that we hold on to faith in our greater potential and the greater potential of others, even if we don't see it in this lifetime sometimes, but I still believe in it and I forge belief in that. That's what I'm holding on to, and holding on to hope that whatever's in front of me today, I have the strength within me to endure it, to create value from it, to survive it, and to use it as fuel for my creative being, which brings me joy, basically. I hope that answered that directly.
Yes. During our conversation, I started having an image in my head about how, rather than believing we are our thoughts, right, that we get stuck in our thinking, think that's who I am.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That we are the light within, right?
Exactly.
We're that light emanating forth, right? I especially started to visualize that when you were talking about sharing that and we call it the creative life force. It's not just right. The life force is the creative life force, but to illuminate ourselves and others. Yes. And I find it so interesting that earlier on you had used the word disharmony. Right. So the word disharmony, you also use like the word draw, to draw your boundaries. And those are also they're metaphors, but also reality of art, right? Harmony, music, disharmony, drawing, right?
Yes. And nature and
giving
life.
Voice, music.
Yeah. Right? Yes. I think all of those are, I love how you think that. I have many songs and poetry that also talk about the light that we have within us, to polish that light, to shine that light. And I use the analogy of sunflowers because in the SGI Buddhist practice women's division, it's the flower for the women's members of the organization. And what it symbolizes is that the sunflower always aims its face towards the sun. It's always looking for the light, always looking for that positivity. And despite being pounced on with rain and whatever, and overcome with weeds, it still directs itself towards the light. And I think that creativity does that, even if we're not necessarily. I had a conversation with someone else recently on a different podcast, and they were talking about how they're drawn to sad music because he wrestles with anxiety. And I think, and that's what I was saying earlier, when people came up to me at gigs and were thanking me for whatever the music was I played, whether it was my music or some pop artist that I did or a classical piece, it expressed something, even if it's negative. Having that release of whatever it is lightens it up. It does bring that light, out of people, I think. Don't you think? From your experience.
That idea too of that too is part of being human.
Yes. And honestly, again, I have a poem about that too, that without darkness, there is no light. If you don't struggle against difficulty, you can't have the benefit and the joy of victory. You know, you have forged something, a strength inside of you when you face a difficulty with bravery. So, you know, to me, that's what creativity as a tool helps us do, and also spiritual practices. And of course, communicate, you know, communities and connecting with other people, like-minded people that are striving for a greater purpose or to help the world. Putting ourselves in those arenas like this, I think, goes a long way towards replenishing our own creative energy. And creativity boosts your mood, you know, and that helps your mental
Yes.
well-being. So
Yeah. And for those who are interested in neurotransmitters and brain chemistry, that boosting of the mood is
yes,
related to changes that are actually happening in our brains, right?
yes,
That will happen without our making it happen. It's going to naturally happen that way. So in some sense, we can be our own medicine. And I'm
yeah,
also advocating for under a doctor's supervision. There are certainly medications that also can be of help and are
right,
needed.
right.
And we can also help ourselves. I also want to throw in a good night's sleep is very important, right?
Yes,
Right? That for creative people and also people in general, there's so much on our plate, right?
right,
The
right,
plate is
right,
getting smaller and the stuff on the plate is getting bigger, that
right,
we can all be at sleep deficit, and we
right,
need that rejuvenation to help us. I also
right.
want to say, to kind of piggyback on what you had just said before, Jenny, that without life's difficulties or the fear and anxiety, that there is no courage, right?
Mhm.
And that we don't have to wait not to be not afraid to move forward,
That's right.
right? That
Yeah, yeah.
we can have that faith, trust, take small steps in the right direction,
Mhm.
um, reach out for support, a friend, and you know, a song can be a friend, a
Yeah.
poem can be a friend too. But
Can I say too, about courage? Anytime I've acted courageously, I was still scared to death. So to me, courage is taking action despite how you feel. And from taking that courage, taking that action, whatever it was, um, when I come out on the other side of it, I have more confidence because I've been through that. I can do that. I know I can do the next thing. You know, it reminds me of that Eleanor Roosevelt quote, which my brother was killed in a car accident when he was 10 days before his 29th birthday in 2004. And that quote I found during that process of trying to kind of get through my grief with it. And it was something to the effect Eleanor Roosevelt said, when you look bravely directly at what you're afraid of, you can get through that. And once you've gotten through that very difficult situation, you know that you can get through whatever comes next. And that has held me through that period. But it also, when I look back at my life, I see, you know, being courageous is not feeling totally confident and like 100% I got this. It's diving into the darkness and just with determination and feeling afraid, but doing it anyway. And I find that over and over again, I've had those experiences. And when I've done that, um, I look at myself now compared to, you know, those earlier years, and I see, wow, the transformation, the confidence, the wisdom, the strength that I have. Um, it didn't come from not feeling afraid. It came from doing it anyway, is my point. Yeah. I also wanted to say, sorry, about your point about that we need rest, we need sleep, and that might help, you know, Kino, with some of your artist clients as well as all your listeners. That is something that I start with all of my clients and all my products, and my digital products and my content. I have a reset framework, and it's RESET, and it stands for different things. But the very first thing is regularly rest, and that it doesn't just mean getting enough sleep. It means forging a regular protective, you know, protection around your night rhythm, your morning rhythm, and particularly when it comes to creative people, you know, particularly professional creatives. I don't know if you've experienced this as creators yourselves, but often when we get into a creative project, we forego food, sleep, You know, we're just so honed in on our creative zone that we just get rid of the necessities. And sometimes that happens, but after that heavy work period, it, science, and research backs up that you really do need to bake in some buffer time after that. You've got to have a period, because creativity is an ebb and flow. You just can't keep flowing. You have to have a rest period, right? So that's one of the things that I constantly, start with myself as well as all my clients, is making sure you're protecting your rest, making sure you're protecting it throughout the day, like taking mini breaks throughout the day, taking short breaks, walking away from it, looking outside, taking a short walk, getting a cup of tea, just mini breaks throughout things. Or like I said, creating buffers around heavy work projects or something. Give yourself some space in between, because rest does deeply impact our mood. So I just wanted to back up what you said there about that.
Jenny, as
Yeah,
you were
there's another
speaking,
link also. I just wanted to link up something, between what the two of you said about, when someone is sad, they listen to sad music. And then Diana also said a song can be your best friend, which is sad in a way that if Kino is feeling sad right now, he has to listen to music because that song or that artist or both is the only person right now that can resonate with what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And why I say it's sad is because there's so many people out there that just doesn't have anybody physical right in front of them to turn to.
Yeah, that's
That's the
true.
sad part.
but sad and a blessing, right? Maybe a
Yeah.
person has had difficult relationships with people, and they feel safer and more understood through the poetry of someone. So
Yeah.
it's
like
one of those. It's not. I don't think it's either or. It can be a combination of both.
Yeah. It's like getting, for example, it's
Yeah.
getting your heart broken, right, by a girl or a boy. And then you go and listen to all these love songs, right? And it's happened to all of us. I can even admit I was there once upon a time in my life. It's happened to all of us. And then it makes the situation worse as well, because then as you're listening to the song, all you're thinking about is that person. In sync with that, now my heart is also broken.
Yes. Yeah. I think you have to know yourself, and you have to that's where part of my talking about developing self-belief and self-trust, and learning that, okay, sometimes it's good to listen to the sad or angry music and just be there in that moment and express what I'm feeling and sit with those feelings. That in itself is valid. But when you start feeling stuck there, or you start feeling like it's making you feel worse, that's when you have to learn to trust yourself to, okay, maybe I need to switch the vibe, reach out to someone to talk to, or listen to something maybe more positive, or read poetry, or write, find some outlet that's not keeping you stuck in a groove. And I think that's a process of developing self-trust. And, through what you guys are doing with dialogues and opening the discussion and helping clients, that can help them, develop that, I don't know what the word is, practice or habit. You can't just get stuck if you want to grow. Like you said, we have to, there's a limit to that. You want to be self-aware enough that you're not just perpetuating your misery, right? There's a limit to it. And so everybody has to find that for themselves, through the tools that you're providing, and through coaches and through therapy and things like that. I think, there's a way out.
In your poem, I think you talked about space and the blue skies, that maybe that inner releasing is fresh air inside ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And when we're listening in poetry therapy, they would talk about, like, I think the word is something like isomorphic. So if I'm feeling sad, I'm listening to sad music.
Right.
But the benefit of that is potentially a resonance, but also a release of those feelings, so
especially
that there's an inner clarity and something new,
Right.
But I wanted to just for a moment go back, Jenny, to when you were talking about courage and going forward, knowing one is also afraid, and then building up one's confidence through, actually doing that.
Right.
And I thought of, as you were speaking, like that to remember, what one's done. I've done that before, but the meaning of remember, if you break the word, it's remember. So member are body parts, as it were, right? The parts of ourselves, and in remembering, we can also put ourselves back together again in a new way.
Mm.
And I think you in some way were alluding to that.
Yeah, that's
because I can
beautifully
look back and go, oh, I've been through terrible times before, and I got through it. Right. And that has strengthened me.
Right.
And I guess that's a more active remembering. So it's not like a passive, like, oh, that happened, but oh, that happened, and I'm sort of a new person here.
Right.
I can think of myself in a new way.
Yeah,
I'm changed. I became transformed. Right.
Yeah, and I think that remembering is exactly that. Just realizing, because I've been through that, I am different now. Therefore, I'm stronger than I was before that. Therefore, I can do the next thing. Right.
I want to say, having you as a guest on Talking Back to Suicide, you have strengthened me.
Oh, good.
Yes. So, do you have, Jenny, any final wise words you'd like to share if someone perhaps is listening who is struggling, and also about your website and how people can learn more about you?
Well, first of all, thank you. I think we could have like a whole mastermind 2-week dialogue between the three of us and cover a lot of territory, because I think we're very synergistic in our goals, and I really I do feel like it's mutually admiration for what you're doing, and for the listeners. I'm confident that this is going to inspire people to believe more strongly in their own innate creativity and their own innate power and potential, and to not feel like they're by themselves. We all have struggles, right? And we all have to get through that. And I hope that from this conversation, you dive into some of these creative, spiritual, practical strategies to take care of yourself. To me, that's the prime point is self-compassionate care, and it starts for ourselves. That's what I would say to anybody, listening. And I invite you to, explore practical, creative, and self-compassionate practices and strategies that I have. If you want to check out my resources and empower your creative flow and inspired living, you can find all my resources, podcast and coaching program and stuff at yourcreativechord.com/get inspired here.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's really been wonderful listening to you and being in your presence.
I want to say the same to both of you. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.